let's get cracking. So first and foremost, the first question is, how do I get stronger at the pull-ups? Currently having a one-arm chin-up goal and getting to be faster at 10K. Cool. So with regards to getting stronger at pull-ups, if we start off, we'll treat pull-ups and one-arm pull-ups as slightly separate questions just because they are very, very different movements. A one-arm pull-up is a hell of a lot more advanced than a two-arm pull-up. Okay, so first of all, we've got to treat them like they're a skill, basically. So when it comes to doing these like high-end goals, like pull-ups, heavy back squats, heavy deadlifts, there is a big skill component to them. Okay, so that means that we need lots of frequent practice. And the more advanced that skill is, the more practice we need. So for example, getting to a 100 kilo deadlift would need a lot less practice than getting to, say, a 200 kilo deadlift. Okay, same thing applies here. Okay, so when it comes to getting strong at pull-ups, we need lots of frequency across the week. We need to make sure that we are getting them in like a variety of rep ranges. So that might be doing some weighted pull-ups. It might be doing some higher rep body weight only pull-ups. It might mean doing some pull-ups with quite short rest periods to get a lot more density done. And then when it comes to one-arm pull-ups, the difficulty here is very hard to regress. So of course, if you're working up doing so like deadlifts or back squats, you can just reduce the load on the bar. When it comes to doing something like a single arm pull-up, it's really, really difficult. We can look to use things like a gravitron, like an assisted pull-up machine. We could maybe look at doing band assisted ones. We could look at doing then negatives, but we need to try and figure out a point in which you can enter into that process of being able to do some sort of regression for a single arm pull-up and then build up from there, just like you would any other exercise. Okay, so work out where your entry point is, where can you get to? For example, would it be like a top half of a one-arm pull-up? Would it be like a one-arm pull-up holding onto the arm, holding onto the rack, doing banded ones? Anything like that, work out where your entry point is. And then when it comes to getting faster at a 10K, I would just make sure that you're treating it like any other type of running event. So making sure that we get in some sort of speed work. So we might do that earlier on in the week. We might look at doing, say, like a longer run at the weekend. And we might look to do a tempo run in the middle of the week. And I would usually say that is like the minimum kind of dose and volume that I'd expect most people to incorporate into a 10K training program. And then as time goes on, we might look to increase the volume there as well. We might look to put an extra easy run in and stuff like that. But key things of being like a hybrid athlete here need to apply. We need to make sure that we're keeping the easy runs easy, the hard runs hard, and make sure that we perhaps push most of the hard work in the gym and in terms of doing intervals and stuff more towards the start of the week. And in that way, as the weeks progress, or as the days of the week progress rather, we get a little bit more respite and recovery from what we've taxed at the start of the week versus what we've taxed at the end of the week. So long run, hypertrophy stuff towards the end of the week, strength work and sprints and stuff more towards the start of the week. So I know that's a very general guide, but that's kind of how I'd structure the program overall. Cool. So second question, if for whatever reason you can't do one of the sessions on a specific day, is it best to merge with the next day's workout or carry on and do it on the rest day? Okay, so I would say if you can't do one of the sessions on a specific day, preferably you just knock all the sessions along. So for example, if you can't do the Tuesday session, then you would then do that on the Wednesday and then carry on. You could still keep the rest day in, or you could skip that and knock it on into the next week. That's part of the reason why training to RPE can be so effective. So when we look at stuff like, let's say, for example, we try and work to like fixed loads on the bar, fixed speeds, it doesn't allow for a lot of flexibility. Whereas if you're working to RPE, it doesn't really matter. So you just do whatever you feel like you can do on that given day. So for example, let's say you've trained back to back for multiple days, and then for the following session, you're feeling a bit knackered and you're working at an 8 RPE. Well, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on which way you look at it, 8 RPE when you're feeling tired is going to be a lot slower than 8 RPE when you're feeling really good, feeling recovered, and that kind of stuff. So it just bakes in that auto-regulation, that flexibility. Okay. So yeah, that's probably best. But sometimes, do you know what? If you just can't do one of the sessions, sometimes it's good just to skip it. Okay. It's really not going to be the end of the world. Cool. So next question. I noticed on your Instagram, you used the timer earlier on your laptop. What's that for? So it's called a Pomodoro timer. I don't know why it's called a Pomodoro. I think that's something to do with tomatoes in Italian, I think. But basically, a Pomodoro is typically where you take a half-hour block of time, you do 25 minutes of work or whatever you're trying to keep yourself focused on, then you have a 5-minute break, and then you repeat the process for a certain number of times, probably until you've completed the task. But basically, all it allows me to do personally, and I caveat that with personally, it's probably not going to work for everyone, but in that 25 minutes, it keeps me nice and focused. It means that I've got a decent length of time to try and get my shit done, but not too long a time, so it doesn't seem like it's completely insurmountable. And yeah, just keeps me focused. And then you get a nice 5-minute break where you can go for a pee, you can get some water, you can get a coffee, or whatever it might be. Probably what's best is to structure, like, say, I don't know, 2 to 4 blocks of Pomodoros together, then have a slightly longer break where you can do some, like, you can indeed have like a proper break. You might go out for a walk, you might grab some food, anything that takes a bit longer to do than 5 minutes. But it does definitely help you break down bigger tasks into smaller chunks of time, which for a lot of people, myself included, can make things feel a little bit more manageable. I use this typically with also an app called Notion. Notion is like it's like an organizing app, I guess is the best way to put it, but you can actually turn it into whatever you want. To-do lists, break down tasks into like subcategories, etc., etc. Yeah, I'm a bit of a geek for that kind of stuff, but anyway, it keeps me rather nice and focused, and I quite like it. Next question. Can I combine this challenge with other fitness sessions I do during the week? For example, yoga, pump class, etc., or should I be looking to do this as more of a standalone challenge for the next 14 days? So the program itself was designed to be done as like a standalone thing, but that does not for 1 second mean that you can't add other stuff to it. Again, a bit like I was saying about the question with regards to the rest day, because you're working to RPE, it just doesn't really matter. Okay, so let's say, for example, you did a pump class earlier on in the day, and then in the PM, you've got your mild time trial, or actually, no, that's a bad example. Let's say, for example, rather than a mild time trial, you've got a lower body workout, let's say. Because you're going to be a little bit fatigued from that pump class, you're not going to probably perform at your very best for the weight session in the PM. But because you're working to RPE, that's already baked in. So your 8 RPE when you're tired from the pump class is going to be a little bit less than your 8 RPE as if you were feeling box fresh, feeling really good, well slept, recovered, etc., etc. The program will still work. Okay, you just need to make sure that you are not putting too much on your plate and allowing you to get lots of exercise done from like a time perspective as well, because obviously you only have so many hours in a day. There's so much you can do while still kind of like making the whole program like doable. Yeah, don't put too much onto your plate there. But yeah, certainly, I mean, I'm all about, like, even though we give it this like almost like silly label of being hybrid and being a hybrid athlete, etc., etc., it's whatever it means to you. It doesn't just have to be like running and being strong or being muscular. It can be, do you know what? I want to get all the benefits of yoga, the social benefits of doing classes, the muscle mass benefits of strength training, the getting stronger benefit of strength training, etc., etc. You can combine whatever you like. But yeah, the key thing is just to respect like your time constraints, how well you can recover, etc., etc. And then the next question. Hello to everyone who's just joined, by the way. If you have any other questions that you want me to answer, there is at the bottom a Q&A box, and you can type in any questions that you like, and I will get them covered here tonight. Yeah, perfect. Or if you've got anything that you want to ask, like, or anything you like, any statements you want to make separate to questions, you can whack it in the chat box at the bottom, and I will, of course, answer there as well. Cool. So thanks for your questions, Dan. I will get all those covered towards the end, mate. I think we'll have plenty of time, so that's all good. Cool. So next question. I don't use any type of fitness tracker currently other than Strava when running. Should I be? To be honest, like, it doesn't really matter. I think as long as you've got something that can measure your speed or your pace, your distance, and you've got some sort of measure of how hard you're working, i.e., even if that's something internal, like, right, how hard am I finding this right now? That's absolutely fine. It doesn't have to necessarily be heart rate or power or whatever. it can be just how you're feeling in your own head. That's a perfectly good measure of intensity. So as long as you've got those three things, you're going to be absolutely fine. So if you just use Strava on your phone, that's totally cool. The only time that might become unsuitable is if, like, eventually you might find you quote unquote outgrow just using your phone and using Strava, and you might want to have like a watch, because you might want to keep your phone in your pocket or in like a running pack or vest or whatever whilst you're running, and then that might work out better for you. But yeah, otherwise I wouldn't worry too much about it. I've done like reasonably well at running and other like endurance sports, and I've probably never really used half of the features that my fairly advanced watch has on it. Like, I've never really bothered looking at the recovery score, my race predictor. Can't think of anything else off the top of my head. But yeah, anyway, like, basically most people only use the basics, and even the advanced people just use the basics most of the time anyway. All of the extra stuff is just kind of like the icing on the cake. So to answer your question, using Strava by itself is absolutely fine. If you want to watch and your funds allow, go for it. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good way of answering it. Next question. What supplements should I use for a pre-workout? So pre-workout, the only thing that's really like, well, there's a couple of things that are scientifically, I'm not going to say proven, but like have scientific evidence to back them that they are useful and they do work. Number one is caffeine. Caffeine acts as like as a stimulant. Start off with a dose that you know that you can tolerate. So to give you an example, I think, and I'm probably going to really badly misquote this, so I apologize. We've got another attendee. How's it going, mate? Hope you're all good. Yeah, with the dose for caffeine, I think, and I might be misquoting this, but I think it's around 4 milligrams per kilo is something which is used in the literature a lot. I think it might be 3 to 4 milligrams per kilo. That can add up to quite a lot. So to give you an idea, there's about 60 milligrams of caffeine in a shot of espresso, but having 3 to 4 milligrams of caffeine, if you're like, say, 80 kilos, is 240 to 320 milligrams. That is a lot of espresso. Okay, so be careful, start low, assess your tolerance as you go up. It can have all sorts of effects like, sorry, I've just triggered my Siri. Sorry about that. Yeah, it can have all sorts of effects like on your gut. It can make you feel quite anxious. There is too much kind of like stimulation sometimes. You sometimes just want to kind of give it enough to help you beat fatigue, feelings of tiredness, stuff like that, rather than absolutely like blast yourself into the stratosphere because you've like fucked yourself up on pre-workout Red Bull and a shot of espresso or whatever. Okay, so just keep it chill, gradually ramp up as your tolerance becomes clear. Then we also have supplements like beta-alanine. Beta-alanine can work in fairly specific circumstances, usually in sets or runs which last between like 90 seconds and 3 minutes. Again, I apologize if I'm misquoting that slightly, but that's the general ballpark. And basically what this does is it helps to buffer acidity in your bloodstream. So when we start to work hard and we feel like a burn, typically that is associated with a rise in pH, a lowering of pH, or your blood gets more acidic. When we start to exercise, we get that feeling of sickness. Beta-alanine helps to buffer this and basically helps to keep us in a bit more of a narrow kind of range of acidity in the bloodstream. Then, to be honest, that's it. Like, make sure you've got some carbohydrate in you, can usually make you feel a bit better. Maybe a bit of sodium to help you retain some water. Otherwise, that's about it. Creatine doesn't work as a pre-workout. Creatine just works like chronically rather than acutely. It's got no kind of like immediate benefit. Yeah, be hydrated as well. Yeah, just the simple stuff really. Caffeine, beta-alanine, carbohydrate, sodium, fluids. Next question. We're about halfway through. Any other questions, gang? Just pop it in the Q&A box at the bottom. Hello to anyone else who's just joined as well. And as I say, if you've missed the first 15 minutes, it's all going to go up on the YouTubes on a separate recording. Cool. Right. Next question. I want to run a marathon next year, but worried I won't have time to train, in brackets, especially like a hybrid athlete, to perform at my best. How can I keep my training time down? Okay, very good question. So, number one, if your first thought, I'm not saying this is your first thought, but if it's your first thought that I don't have enough time to train, it's quite a slippery slope because like training for an event which lasts a long time takes a lot of training time. So let's say, for example, like you're predicting that you are going to be running a marathon in like 4 hours. Okay. That probably means that for at least some of your weeks, you're going to have to be doing about 4 hours, maybe 5 or even 6 hours of running across the week to make sure that we get the requisite volume in the legs and time on feet and stuff. And that's before we've even considered all of your strength work and anything else you want to do. Okay, so just be careful with regards to that, where if you can't devote a minimally sufficient amount of time to the task, it might not be the event for you to do right now. Okay, or you just need to reprioritize other things in your life to make way for getting the training in. Okay, so that's like the first kind of thought and caveat. Second, I would make sure that we take a real kind of harsh look at all of your training and be like, right, what can we get rid of? What can we absolutely do without? So, for example, lengthy warm-ups, get them out. Lots of mobility work, unless it's absolutely needed or recommended by physio. And when I say needed, like, do you need it to be able to run properly? If the answer is no, get it out. Excessive amounts of weight training volume, get it out, etc., etc. Okay, we then would just need to look at, right, the most important workout of the week for a marathon runner is that long run on the weekends, or typically on the weekends, probably ranging anything between, like, depending on where you are in the training cycle, 90 minutes up to like 3, even 4 hours sometimes. Usually typically peaks at around like 20 miles. Make sure that that is prioritized. Then everything else is of lesser importance. We then probably look at other easy runs to get the volume in, and then maybe a bit of speed work as well to just make sure you're feeling nice and sharp. Okay, so yeah, hopefully that makes sense. And again, I know it's a very kind of brief answer, but for the purposes of like a Q&A session, hopefully that fits the bill. Any kind of more specific help, I'd recommend like booking in with me for a one-to-one consult, or actually help you with your training program. Next one, I'm thinking of training for a Hyrox event next year. How should I split my training week up? Okay, so with a Hyrox, the first thing to remember is that Hyrox is basically a running event. Okay, the vast majority of the event is running. Okay, so we need to make sure that we have got very, very specific aerobic fitness for running to make sure that we perform at our best. It's no good just because I find that a lot of people who do Hyrox don't really particularly like running for some reason, or like don't incorporate enough of it into their training. This is a huge mistake if you actually want to improve. Okay, so lots and lots of running. Something along the lines of a sort of a 10K training program would be quite smart, where you have a long run at the weekends, a tempo run midweek, and some speed work at the start of the week. Okay, to make sure that you're pretty sharp, you can hold the requisite pace for your target pace for each of your 1 kilometer intervals between each station. A tempo work to make sure that you can like tolerate working when your legs are feeling knackered. This might become like a compromised running session when you get a little bit closer to the event for a bit more specificity. So you might go from like heavy lunges into running, or sled push into running, or whatever it might be. And then also that long run to really build up that aerobic system. You've got to remember, Hyrox is quite a long event, so it's going to be very, very demanding on the aerobic system. In fact, that is going to be by far the most dominant energy system that's involved during the event. So we need to make sure that it is tip top. And then off the back of that, we would just try and think like, right, where are your weaker disciplines? We maybe need to bring those up and prioritize them, and try and break various components of it down into a session. So for example, we might look at, say, right, what's the baseline level of strength we can get away with? Might look at, say, for squats, 3 to 4 sets a week, deadlift 3 to 4 sets, same for bench, overhead press, maybe some pulling variations through the upper body, so pull-ups or chin-ups or rows. Make sure we've got all our bases covered there. Then we might start to look to say, right, we now need to try and practice some of the events, but broken down. So, for example, wall balls broken down into like sets of 15, sets of 20, get them as part of a Metcon to get you used to performing them under fatigue, etc., etc. Okay, again, a bit like the marathon question. I know it's a very general response, but yeah, for the purposes of the Q&A, hopefully that kind of brief explanation will give you a bit of an idea of how to fit it all together. Okay, 2 more questions to go before I answer the questions you guys have asked here. So how do you structure a training session? So again, but bit of a broad question, but I'll do my best. So training session, what does the individual want to try and achieve? So first and foremost, whatever they're looking to achieve, we'll probably try and address first in the session when they're feeling at their most fresh. So for example, if they're a powerlifter, typically you would do something like the squat, deadlift, or bench first, because that's how their competition is like performed. They're going to be performing that when they're reasonably fresh. So we make sure we get that specificity in there. And then we just break it down. So they've got that primary goal of getting strong. Let's say if it's a powerlifter, but then off the back of that, they also need lots of muscle mass and strength around like the back of the body. So we then might start to look to do some accessory work, which could be rows, it could be some tricep work, etc., etc. And then we might look and say like, right, what is the real kind of like base level stuff which allows them to get more training done? So I would be thinking, right, if it's a powerlifter, we need some base aerobic work. We need some base hypertrophy to make sure their joints, the tendons, the smaller muscles are strong. So we might look at putting in like some aerobic work on the bike. We might look to be doing some like curls, triceps, all those sorts of variations to make sure that, again, all of their base stuff is all kind of present and correct as well. Again, and that's a very like broad, brief answer, but hopefully that answers the question. And then last one, which is more of like a statement rather than a question. And I feel like it's a bit of a dig. It looks like you consume a lot of caffeine. So like, yeah, like probably more than some people, but not as much as many others. I think without giving this question too much like explanation, because I don't need to really explain myself, the like caffeine is very well tolerated in most people. It's very safe. I like how I feel when I've had caffeine as well. It doesn't really tend to give me like anxiety or jitters like it does in some people. With regards to drinking stuff like Monster, I find it incredibly like hydrating as well. Coffee, I just like the taste of. So yeah, there you go. Cool. So those were all the questions that were previously submitted. We've now got some great questions in here. So let's start from the top. So I'm a hybrid athlete wannabe, but my specialization is in Spartan racing. I want to build a bit of mass strength and hypertrophy, but I don't want to get it in the way of speed work. Shall I focus more on my running before building mass, or can I do both at the same time? So there is like another question about periodization, but we'll come on to that later, but I'm going to cover it briefly now. If you think you've got your calendar, you're going to have a period of time well away from your racing, that is the time to be focusing like body composition goals. So you put if you imagine like things are on like dials or sliders, so you might put your priority for speed work down to more of like a maintenance level, but that gives you a bit of volume and room to be pushing up your volume and intensity, maybe frequency and that kind of stuff, more towards building muscle mass. You'd have a section of time, remembering that building mass and hypertrophy takes a good amount of time to like build lean tissue. So give yourself as long a period as you think is reasonable. I'd say at least 8 to 12 weeks, if not more, to try and really work on that that kind of like specific aspect of your fitness, and then go from there. You can absolutely do both at the same time, but you just want to be a little bit careful that the two don't interfere with each other in terms of recovery and stuff like that, because speed work and strength and muscle mass are actually kind of like, in terms of the physiological demands, they're actually like fairly close together. Whereas if you think about like aerobic performance and high and like say like strength, they're kind of fairly opposing ends of the spectrum, and you can quite often work on those at the same time without too much issue with some clever programming. But yeah, hypertrophy and strength and speed and stuff is like maybe a little bit of a different kind of issue. And then next one, I feel famished after every run. How do I balance it with being on a deficit or maintenance without losing so much energy and performance? Yeah, this is a really common one. I think we've all had it where like you might have body composition goals and you go out for a run because you want to get fit or whatever, or even just use it as a bit of an energy drain to actually get deeper into a calorie deficit. And we come back and we just want to eat the contents of the fridge, the cupboards, the freezer, because like you are absolutely starving because you've expended so much energy. Well, in this instance, I'd recommend a few things. Number one, make sure that you're not running too aggressive an energy deficit, because if you are, just realized I can actually do this. There we go. Cool. Yeah, when you do this, so I've just completely lost my train of thought then. So yeah, when you want to eat like the contents of the fridge, make sure you're not entered too deep in energy deficit. Make sure that you've got just enough of a deficit so it's gentle and it's not impacting your training too much. Then I would also make sure that perhaps if your sessions are long, say 45 minutes plus, make sure that you perhaps get a little bit of energy in partway through the run. This will keep your blood sugar on a bit more of a level, give you some energy that's available to use whilst you're actually training, and that might prevent some of the post-workout kind of hunger pangs. Okay, so yeah, that'd be my top two tips. Gentle deficit. Try and make sure that you are, if your activities are over 45 minutes and it's aerobic based or endurance based, bang in a little bit of a carbohydrate snack, gel, chew, something like that, about halfway through. And then if it's a long one, make sure that you're getting it in frequently, every say like 25 to 30 minutes. Okay, cool. Let's just get that one in the answered box as well. And then the next one, I find that I plateaued my run at 4.5 minutes, and this is the result of my 1.6 km test. That is a very, very fast mile time, my man. Very good job. Any tips so I can get it faster? Should strength work, muscle building take a back seat? I mean, I think by the time you're running a 4.5 minute mile, yeah, probably, because if you think the vast majority of us aren't specialists. So if you're like quite average at running and you're like, I'm not saying like it's a bad thing, but for most people, they are quite average at running. They are quite average at strength. They are quite average in terms of like the build. Because they're average, it means that they've got much more capacity to like improve all of those things at the same time. However, the more we get towards specialism, the harder that is to do. And that is why Mo Farah looks like Mo Farah rather than like Ronnie Coleman, because the demands of the training, which he has to do to get as good at what he does, means that he doesn't have time to build muscle. He doesn't have the capacity in his like physiology to build muscle because, sorry about the siren, about to go past. Sorry about that. Yeah, because he doesn't have that like kind of recovery capacity, the time, the inclination, it's just not going to work. So you are perhaps at a 4.5 minute mile getting to that sort of realm where that is going to be a little bit tougher to like do the strength work and the muscle building and stuff. However, tips to get faster, 9 times out of 10, more aerobic work. Even the mile, even though it's a short distance, is predominantly aerobic in terms of its energy system contribution. Okay. So more long runs, more easy runs throughout the week, making sure that we're fueling all of our sessions appropriately, making sure that the speed work that we do, because now you're getting to really, really fast mile time, we need to make sure that you've got kind of like enough speed in reserve. So if you can't run, say, I don't know, say you've got a target to get your time down to like 4:15 per mile. If you can't run the, let's say, for example, like 400s at that pace due to a lack of pace or speed, then that is obviously going to be a big issue. But 9 times out of 10, as I say, it's just getting more aerobic work in, which is really going to help. You will find also that by the time you're getting this good at running a fast mile, you have to do a lot of running volume as well. So make sure that you prioritize that and get it done in your training. Cool. Perfect. And then next one, opinion on reverse periodization where intensity comes first before base building. Yeah, like I really like reverse periodization for power athletes like sprinters, but for most normal people, yeah, I would recommend just sticking to like quite traditional periodization model or even concurrent periodization where you are building on a lot of different qualities all at once. Just at times you just kind of adjust the volume somewhat, depending on where your strengths are, depending on where you might have like competitions or like testing blocks. But yeah, otherwise I'm not really a big fan of reverse periodization for like endurance athletes, which is normally the kind of people I deal with, or people who like to train towards endurance but also do strength work, etc., etc. That helps. And then last one, as an athlete, did you start as someone who's already huge, then wanted to do an endurance? If yes, would it be really possible to steadily get huge and fast at the same time, or has one got to go? So, I mean, yeah, like to be honest, I did start off more with like a hypertrophy, power, bodybuilding background. If I'm honest, I do also like naturally find that like I just put a muscle like reasonably easily, and perhaps my genetics determine that a little bit more than perhaps other people. So yeah, but that being said, and like obviously that's just my N=1 experiment, is that I find it like quite easy to build muscle and like improve my endurance at the same time. It's of course not going to be the same for everyone, but that is definitely the case with me. But speaking for other people, it is one of those ones where like, yeah, you can steadily get huge and fast at the same time. But remembering that we have to concede that if your goal was to just get huge, you could do it much quicker if you just have that one track minded goal of like, right, this is what I'm going to focus on. This is what I'm going to do. This is how I'm going to eat. This is how I'm going to train. And you just work towards that. You get there much quicker than trying to ride 2 horses at the same time. Okay. However, that's not to say that it works like an on-off switch. Okay. So yes, you can get huge much faster if you just train to get huge. But let's say, for example, that's you at 100%. You could still be at like 80% by trying to train to get huge, but also remembering that actually I can also apply a minimum effective dose to some speed work, to some aerobic work, so I can make gains there at the same time as well. Okay. If we think rugby players are a great example of this, okay, other like games, field sport athletes, like American footballers to a certain extent, depending on what position they're playing, of course. Even to an extent, like the World Championship athletics were on quite recently, and you look at some of the physiques of the decathletes, they are literally like the definition of a hybrid athlete. They are fast, they're fit, they're strong, they're absurdly powerful. So they managed to get all of these kind of qualities done whilst maintaining a great body composition as well. So those folks are a great example of how it can or indeed be done. It just needs to be smart programming needs to be applied. You need to probably make sure you're eating a shitload of food as well to make sure that you're recovered, you're sleeping well, your other life stresses are well balanced and well controlled, and you're not trying to kind of like move house, go through a divorce, train for a marathon, try to like put 40 pounds each onto your bench press, your deadlift, and your squat. Like at the end of the day, we've all got a limited capacity to recover and to adapt. But again, as I say, with smart programming, fairly smart lifestyle choices, it should all work out absolutely fine and absolutely is possible. Cool. Right, gang. That's everything. What a guy. He's here at 1 a.m. And so sorry, let me just read this out in full if you guys can't see it. So Dan says, really appreciate the knowledge bombs here, James. It's 1 a.m. in my country, but worth it. Mate, absolute pleasure to have you here. And thank you for sacrificing your sleep to be watching this. Cool. So gang, I think that is everything from me. Thanks again to everyone who asked questions. You're tuning in. If you're watching this on replay, thanks for watching as well. Yeah, that's all from me. So have a wonderful rest of your evening. Thanks again, and I'll see you all soon.